So we got, because we got this recording going on. So you guys are all being recorded. All right, so welcome everybody to the VANTEC Angel Network meeting. We meet every single month. We've been doing this since the last century, April 1999. This VANTEC meeting is featuring the future of life sciences and health tech. So if you're interested in the sector, good for you. If you're not, well, you should be, because there's some exciting things happening. I'm proud to introduce our main presenter and moderator today, Wendy Hurlburt, who is the president and CEO at LifeSciences BC. Wendy is a senior executive who brings more than 20 years of global finance, operations, and compliance leadership experience in healthcare and technology sectors. She's held leadership positions at Johnson & Johnson, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and Lexmark International. Wendy has a BA from the University of Western Ontario, MBA from Queen's University, and a certificate in strategic leadership from the Sauder School of Executive Education at UBC. Wendy, I'm really proud to hand this over to you and your esteemed panelists. Take it away.
Thank you very much. And we are super excited to be here. And as was said, we're going to be talking about the future of health tech and life sciences. And my panelists are probably some of the best to be able to talk about that. So what I'm going to start with is a presentation that gives a little bit of a grounding on what the life sciences sector is and its relative importance in BC. And then I'm going to ask my panelists to join me so that we can talk about what the future state is. And as was said, why, if you're not already excited about the life sciences sector, you should be. So if, is it Wendy that is, this is the Wendy Tag Team event, if she's going to share my screen. Okay, and put it in presentation mode. Okay, so next slide. So a little bit about LifeSciences BC, maybe a shameless commercial for those that don't know our organization. We are a member-based, not-for-profit, non-governmental. So we are funded by the generous contributions of those companies that join us as members or sponsor many of the activities that we do on behalf of the sector. We're the voice of the life sciences sector in British Columbia. Increasingly, we find that thought leaders and governments, both provincial and federal, are reaching out to us to learn more and more about our sector, which is also an indication of all the great work that you and many in our sector are doing in raising the profile of our sector. We attract and enable investment. We look for business opportunities. We attend, over the last couple of years, have met delegations from many countries where we promote what's going on in BC and try and make connections that way. We have numerous events, as many of you probably know, that that focus on either professional development or trends, policies, talent, etc. We promote life sciences networking, and we advocate for our sector as well. Our members consist of academic and research institutions, biotech, medtech, digital health, diagnostics, professional services, digital health, and many scientific suppliers, CMOs, CROs. Increasingly other suppliers that want to be specifically focused in our sector. Next slide, please. So we have, as I said, many international conferences. We will be leading a BC delegation to Bio next week. We led a delegation to AdvaMed. In the world of virtual delegations, we are also having it planned to attend some European conferences in the fall. What we do there is really promote the BC ecosystem and enable companies that are also in attendance to be a part of our delegation. So keep watch for our newsletters for what we're up to, and let us know if you're interested in tag team with us on what we refer to as our virtual family road trips. We also have access to innovation every year and, as I said, participate in trade missions. One thing regarding the investment is we have an annual investment conference in the fall. We did it virtually this year, and we're able to attract 90 investors from around the world to come and listen to 30 companies pitch. So something to watch for, and if you're interested, apply to participate in that. So we believe our mission is to create a world-class life sciences sector in British Columbia. And obviously we're well on our way to doing that. In many areas we are world-class. And the way we talk about the sector to the government or other influential people that have an ability to impact our ability to grow our sector is that it always starts with world-class leading science and research and ultimately IP, depending on what stage you're at. And so that is something that while you may see us focus on more of the enablers, it always starts with that world-class science, and those that have been successful in this sector know that. And then enabled by capital, talent, infrastructure, which is largely a broad category of labs, manufacturing, IP, the ability to conduct clinical trials, and data. And then ultimately, when you have something to sell or test, access to markets. And what that does is then produce these world-class innovative companies. Next slide. So a little bit about the sector. We partnered with the BC government and released last fall a report about the sector. This was significant because it was the first time the British Columbia government had actually looked at the sector, come up with a definition that aligned with us, and had some stats. So this data, interestingly enough, is a little bit old, and I know that Ali will correct me when he gets the floor. But a couple of things for those that aren't as familiar with the sector. We have the largest employer based in British Columbia in stem cell technologies. We have what are listed as 3 here, but it's actually 5 companies with a greater than $1 billion market cap of Celera, Zymeworks, SF Pharma, and actually a couple more. We have the largest medtech device design company in Starfish Medical. We are, based off of 2018 data, we were one of BC's fastest growing sectors. I would argue COVID has pushed us to be the fastest. And we're also the fastest growing life sciences sector in Canada. We have approximately 2,000 companies, highly skilled skilled workforce, 18,000 employees, probably closer to 20,000 now, and 22,000 students studying in life sciences related fields, which is one of the fastest growing fields of study. The revenue is 5.4 billion, 1.6 in GDP, 500 million in exports. And Ali's going to dive into this much deeper. We have seen an exponential growth in capital that we've been able to bring into the province in this sector. Next slide, please. So where are we world-class? And there's always going to be people, I apologize if I've left out a particular area of great passion for people, but we are well known in some particular areas. One is around talent. And we always talk that we need more talent, but we have extraordinary talent in BC, and something that we want to ensure that we continue to develop, attract, and retain. Antibodies, we are an antibody hub and known very well for that. Regenerative and cellular medicine, nanomedicine, genomics-based precision medicine, and gene therapies, especially the future of the particular area. MedTech, it may surprise you to know that we're one of the largest exporters in Canada on prosthesis and UV and infrared equipment. We have a number of companies now that are in the 3D printing area, which is certainly a growing area of expertise for BC. Digital health. And then one of the things that really defines British Columbia is our ability of creating solutions for human health, which combine physics, biology, chemistry as an engineered solution. Of course, we have our UBC School of Biomedical Engineering, which is an amazing source of both talent development and innovation. And we continue to see, as you look at some of the very strong innovation that has come out of BC, it's very often two streams of science coming together to produce something of great relevance to human health. And we also tend to be a point of connection between human health, agriculture, food science, and clean tech. And I'm sure there's probably many people on today that you see that divergence coming together. Next slide, please. So as I say, it always starts with good science. We're blessed with a number of world-class science and research facilities. This names a few. The slide's not big enough to include everybody, but it gives you a sense of some of those areas that are the source of innovation or of scaling of innovation or supporting the innovation sector. Next slide, please. Now I use this presentation when I'm out on trade missions sometimes. So this is, really drawing home the breadth and diversity of all the companies that we have, whether they be a growing amount of anchor companies, which I'm pleased to say I have the problem of. There's so many now that I can't fit them on one slide, and many, many companies that have really seen a lot of great success over the last couple of years. Next slide. Thought I would take a little bit of time to talk about our digital health cluster, given what I was asked to talk a little bit about. I was recently participating in a UK, British Columbia trade conference that specifically focused on digital health. And this is one of the slides that I used. So talking about our academic institutions that are a great source of where you see digital health innovation coming out. Of course, it's not only out of the academic institutions that you see it coming from various sectors. But one of the things that I think what makes BC strong is our deep, long-held expertise in creative industries, the digital industry, gaming, VR and AR. We have great talent that is bringing themselves back into the life sciences space of having years in those spaces. Quantum computing, our world-class AI expertise, where we're really seeing the application of AI across many, many areas of life sciences, whether it be drug discovery, prevention, monitoring, med tech. We have a very innovative culture and mindset, which is, really critically important in this particular area. And we also have strong collaboration across the life sciences that integrates digital health across all aspects. And you see it in a lot of the innovation, whether it be in biotech and med tech and some of the other areas. Data and privacy expertise is quite deep in BC. We have the digital supercluster here, obviously. And then again, just a wide range of companies. And when I went to put this list together, I didn't do it all justice because there's many, many more. But it's great to see so many digital health companies coming out of BC and finding their way. Next slide. So something to think about, because I've been told that life sciences used to be considered quite niche. And I think those of us that have been in the sector for a long time actually didn't really see ourselves as that niche and saw ourselves as playing a really important role. And as many people saw, I think while COVID has obviously been extremely challenging for many people and industries, there is some good silver linings that came out of it. And I think one of these things is that when necessity struck, BC's world-class research ended up on center stage. And while we always knew we were strong, almost in a typical Canadian way, we needed the rest of the world to tell us that we were strong for us to stand up taller and really recognize our strength and really be proud and talk about our strength in a broader, bigger way. So we showed that not only do we have world-class research, we can act fast. We also demonstrated the importance of science-based grounded innovation, which is one of our strengths. We pivoted very quickly. Global collaboration and partnerships, which is something I think BC generally does quite well. We're not afraid to work globally or with partners. And we saw all stakeholders come together under a common goal, and amazing things happened. Next slide, please. So I think AbCellera has become a household name, so I probably don't need to tell that story. But the other story, which may or may not be commonly aware, is around Acuitas, a UBC-based innovation. They had been working with BioNTech for 5 years on a cancer vaccine. Last April, pivoted, started working on a COVID vaccine, and then ended up partnering with Pfizer, and the rest is history. The speed at which that came together is extraordinary, but it's a great example of how you see when collaboration comes together under a common goal and how quickly we can act when everybody is working towards that. And it wasn't just the innovation, it also was our regulators, it was our reimbursement authorities, and a number of people coming together to make things happen. And one of my wishes is, as we come through this pandemic, we take some of those great learnings that enabled that to happen and take it forward. The other companies here, Thrive Health was really behind the COVID-19 app. Both Starfish and Triumph got into the ventilator business. Precision Nanosystems, one that is also well known now. And really our British Columbia government, the Ministry of Health, really adopted innovation very quickly as they pivoted to virtual health. And we were working with them very closely for the first 3 or 4 months of COVID in helping them acquire the critically needed supplies that they needed to address some of, if you take yourself back a year ago, people were worried about not having enough masks, reagents were in great supply. So a lot of great collaboration came through that. And really BC innovation is being exported all around the world today. So amazing success for us. Next slide. So how I often talk about the sector is I really passionately believe that there's no sector better positioned right now to both drive the economic recovery and competitiveness of our province, and for that matter, country, while the innovative products, solutions, and services that LifeSciences produces are critically needed to address the complex issues within our healthcare system. And I'm personally pretty optimistic for our BC sector. It's been a global pandemic, and we've had the life sciences sector really thrive, and we are extremely well positioned to contribute both for the economic recovery and really our innovation to address some of the complex issues in our healthcare system. And we've gained a lot of credibility over the last year to show what we really can do and what value we really are bringing. Next slide. So that winds my part up, and so I'd like to invite my panelists to join me now. So Ali, Greg, Jason, and Geof. And maybe we could unshare the screen so I can see them. Okay, so thank you very much. That was me trying to set the stage. Clearly, I think life sciences is the center of the universe, so I don't need to explain that anymore. So what we thought we would do is have each of my fellow panelists introduce themselves and say a few words. I will monitor the chat if there are any questions, but we have some things that we were going to discuss anyway. So Geof, I think you were going to go first.
Sure. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks for the backgrounder here. It is an incredibly exciting time. I was reminded that May marks my 40th year in the medical device and technology space in BC. So not only am I feeling old, I'm feeling impressed to see how this sector has grown. I was sort of asked as part of this panel, what advice I would give investors, what trends to look for. And I think the last year has really stomped on the accelerator for something that we've been anticipating, or at least my company's been anticipating for some time, and has really made it go. And that is the impact of an aging population. The statistics are actually quite stunning. If you look at what's happening with the baby boomers, heading rapidly into retirement, like me, currently, the percentage of people over 65 in Canada is 12.5%. By the end of this decade, which is now only 9 years away, it'll be over 20%. What that means is that where there are 7 potential caregivers for a senior in the population now, by the end of the decade, it'll only be 4, and it'll be decreasing rapidly. So this means that we're going to have this large aging population and fewer caregivers able to, sit with them and be with them and look after them. Well, this is a rather bad situation, because we don't have the physical ability to put people into institutions. We can't afford it. It's the worst possible thing for them. We need alternative ways of caring for people in their own home and aging in place. So this leads us into the impact of virtual care and digital care. One of the things that is, happens with an aging population is that you end up dealing with chronic conditions rather than acute conditions. If we could just pop old people into the hospital and cure oldness, then fine, send them home, they'd be good. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. Over 50% of people over the age of 65 have one or more chronic conditions that will, be with them until they pass away. That's the kind of thing that we need to treat now. So this is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for organizations that are trying to deliver care in the home. We're going to hear from Jenny soon on gut care, and I'll be very interested to hear how she's addressing this growing challenge. It's recognized as a massive problem in the United States, which of course is a market we're interested in. In the new budget that Biden put forward, he's got $400 billion earmarked for home care in the United States. Now, put that in perspective, he earmarked $35 billion to look after highways, bridges, roads, and transportation infrastructure. So more than 10 times as much is deemed to be necessary to look after people in their homes. So how this all relates to COVID is that, as I say, we've been seeing this trend coming for a long time. It isn't hard to see that people get 1 year older every year. But the impact of COVID was that suddenly we have a sharp focus on what's happening to our older population, who hasn't seen the videos of seniors with their hand up against the glass, desperately wanting to have contact with their families. Social isolation is now recognized as a major health problem with as much impact as smoking or obesity. So it's a really bad thing that we have to deal with. Virtual care, some statistics I found out of Ontario, which is really interesting. In June of 2019, 1.6% of ambulatory visits were done virtually. June of 2020, it was 70.6 in the province of Ontario. In June of 2019, 7% of physicians in Ontario had ever done any kind of virtual care. Now it's 86%. So virtual care suddenly just came on in a big flash and took over. None of us inside this industry expect that to go away. It may decline a little bit as people want to actually see their doc face to face and breathe the same air occasionally. But I'm not sitting in an office for half an hour with somebody coughing on me to get a prescription renewal. I'm done with that. And I think most people feel the same way. So I would say that this is the trend that is really going to drive an awful lot of what happens in healthcare over the next 10 years. We have this wave coming, and very few people know what to do about it right now. So my company's involved in trying to help with this, and I'm sure that Jenny's going to tell us what she's trying to do. There are many other organizations that are attempting to deal with this problem, and that's the one I think we should watch for. A lot of this is going to be digital health because of the nature of how we can get into patients' home without having to send a person in there. So maybe I'll toss it over to Jason and let him talk about digital health areas, if that's okay with you, Wendy.
That's exactly what we were going to do next. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks, Geof. And what Geof hasn't talked about that he actually started in the industry when he was 10, so he's still very much useful. But all joking aside, Geof touched on a couple of different I think critical trends that I thought were meaningful and I think worthy of expounding upon a little bit. I apologize if there's a little bit of background noise. I think firstly, as Geof was talking about, is the idea of virtual care and in-home care, and how do we sort of think about that? And I think Geof expounded on some interesting stats around the smaller workforce and labor that's going to exist moving forward. And so, how do we think about enabling those remaining human elements to support a broader range of people? And as I think Geof was saying, we definitely see that technology is going to be a key support and infrastructure in that moving forward. And it's, there's some interesting elements about it as we pull it out, right? I mean, I think very much, in our care and in our lives today, whether it's, in a purchasing retail environment, perhaps, or whether it's in a care environment, we still value the service delivery that we receive. We still value the personal touch and the impact. So how do we retain the human element but allow those human elements to scale more effectively, provide better care and provide more care. And so I think, Geof and others are really, I think, spearheading this and have been at the forefront for many years on this. There's some really interesting technologies coming forward, obviously, nothing that you wouldn't be, that anyone here is going to be surprised of. But when we think about, in-home, monitoring vis-a-vis cameras, vis-a-vis voice, these are all things that you can very much see the evolution, occurring between what we have right now for, our smart homes, but leading into a more focused care capacity. I think questions that we need to ask ourselves obviously are going to be, how do we think about the privacy elements, the security elements when we think about that moving forward in the future. But I think it's interesting that I think there's a stronger willingness to adopt these things. I think for the benefits that Geof was alluding to. So this is an interesting situation, because I think this also parallels into other areas outside of home care that we also see, right? And I think to Wendy's point on the acceleration of virtualization and digital tools in health through the pandemic. I think one of the other areas that's really interesting is, again, how do we think about technology augmenting humans in other facets and other areas? And so I think one of the areas that we definitely saw acceleration, would be in things like, behavioral health, mental health, et cetera. But, I think one of the interesting trends that I think has gone a little bit unnoticed, and so I'm going to sort of, I guess maybe talk the book a little bit and think about how we've viewed that ecosystem and that growth is that, I think up until this moment, the early low-hanging fruit for that transition into digital has been virtualization of humans, right? So we think of like telehealth, right? So you take your physical person, you put them in front of a computer, you continue to deliver the same service. That's not scalable. And so what we've seen is that at the early part of the pandemic, everyone moved virtual, everyone moved to telehealth, and that was fine for a moment. But certainly what we've seen both in the physical and the mental and in other behavioral health spaces, there's not enough human support. And this comes back to just, there's just not enough people to support the care and services that we want to deliver moving forward. So how do we think about providing, either all digital solutions to some of these areas, right? And we have companies in the portfolio working on that, or how do we think of those solutions also augmenting the humans, right? And so you can think about, companies, you see this especially in the diabetes space, be it Omada or Livongo, whatnot, where you're leveraging technology so that a human coach can support hundreds of different customers and clients, but do so in a way that the customer still feels, or the user still feels engaged and part of that journey. But again, there's an economics here that needs to make sense as we think about scaling technology. A couple of other things to sort of expound on for the moment. One, I think, I'm sorry, monologuing, I apologize here, but I think this also talks about telehealth. We talk about this transition to telemedicine. An interesting point I heard recently, I thought I would share with everyone, is that telehealth is nothing new. I think we've been trying to push telehealth as a service delivery model for years, if not a decade. And there's been a lot of resistance, and there's been a lot of hesitancy, and there's a lot of things that we still had to get solved. But isn't it interesting, to Geoff's point, how we were able to go from 1% to 70% overnight, right? And so it begs the question, I think, within health, what are the actual barriers to adoption of new innovations and new technologies, right? Is it really as big as we make it out to believe, right? Because if it was, we shouldn't have been able to transition so quickly into virtual delivery models overnight. So obviously there's an issue, where there's a will, there's a way. And maybe there hasn't been the will, and so how do we think about that moving forward? How do we think about incentivizing or create a sort of win-win solutions for the healthcare system to adopt these transformational innovations? I think are really going to move us into the 21st century. I appreciate we're already there, but I guess two more quick things I think I would share. One. When we look out on the sphere, and this is more for investors, I think, one of the things that we saw when we started, a number of years ago, were that, a lot of these innovations and these new companies and these new startups, were niche specific applications to different health areas. And what we're certainly seeing, I think, through 21 is the consolidation within the digital health ecosystem. You're seeing players like the Mind Beacons of the world and Dialogues and Leagues in Canada, and certainly Teladoc and Livongo in the US. Are starting to amalgamate and aggregate that demand. And so when we think about ventures moving forward, I think one of the things as an investor we're cognizant of is that it's unlikely moving forward these existing health platforms and aggregators are really going to be disrupted, right? At least for the moment. So, I think when you think about go-to-market strategies and companies going after it, I think these existing health platforms are going to continue to get bigger. And you can think about it from the customer side for those businesses to be. They don't necessarily want at this stage to be dealing with a dozen different small companies doing a dozen different things. It's too much overhead for them to be able to manage. They really want to go to a single point. But it got me thinking this morning, how do we think about that transition happening for, when we think of the sort of the B2B SaaS space, right? There's still an explosion of companies, right? There's the Slacks and the Asanas and the Trellos and all these sorts of things. I mean, they're not going through these single large players, except we're starting to see that a little bit, right? I mean, Slack obviously got acquired by Salesforce, and maybe we're starting to see that as well. But I think investors need to be mindful of who these partners and players are in the healthcare space, and just be mindful in terms of how they're looking at their companies and how they're going to play together and go to market strategies. And I guess the last point I'll make when we think about companies moving forward is, I think early on early stage companies could skate by a little bit more with sort of informal or sort of white paper type data, self-generated data on the efficacy and value propositions, ROIs of their products and platforms. And I think what we're really starting to see moving forward, that companies are really going to have to spend more effort and more money and time investing in clinical studies that prove out ROI for their customers. And I think this is a critical point. And I think it's really going to change, how we think about investing in terms of magnitude, in terms of time. And so I think that's something to be mindful of when you're thinking about your early stage investment opportunities is, again, go to market, who's going to be buying product with data set they're going to want to see, and are we setting up our innovative companies with the data set they need to be successful in selling there? And with that, I will stop my soapbox and go off, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Jason. There's been some interesting comments on the chat that we'll come back to. I want to make one comment about the will, because I think that's the point that I was trying to make on the when necessity struck. And so, everybody adopts change differently and does it at different rates. And so there was probably a group of people that were, now finally let's go. And then another group of people that tread lightly. And as we all know, there is still a group of people that aren't necessarily as comfortable in it, but they're trying to make their way. So how do we, if we want to even keep the 70% adoption, how do we make sure that we keep those that have adopted actually satisfied and supported through the way? Because I certainly have heard from many healthcare professionals that while they embraced it, they didn't have a choice and they didn't have a lot of support in doing it. So as we all know with change management, we have to go through the change curve and help people through that process where they are. But I also think one thing Jason didn't talk as much about is the level of investment that has come into the sector in particular in that area over the last year and what we've seen happen. And so I'm going to turn to Ali Ardakani right now, who's also going to say a couple of opening words and introduce himself. And he's going to give us a little bit of an overview of what we've seen as changing in the investment landscape and our ability in BC to attract capital.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Wendy and Felzel and VANTEC and LifeSciences BC team for putting this together. I look at COVID as a defining moment for healthcare. And this was a moment where governments looked at healthcare as an annoying line item for spending on these people, primarily people that are aging that Geof referred to, and we have to take care of them. And these pharma companies, we have to buy their expensive drug to keep these people alive, to a moment, oh geez, if we actually don't invest in healthcare, we have to shut down all of our airports and schools and factories, and we have to stay at home. And I think when you look at that, as much as it's been a painful and dramatic effect globally, it was the best thing that could happen to our sector globally. But moreover, I think no other jurisdiction maybe across the world, but definitely not across Canada, was better prepared than BC. And it was a combination of having really good science, having good faith in your good science. You know, when you think about it, companies like Precision Nanosystem and Aquaris, you know, that whole group out of Peter Collis's lab started working on these delivery platforms for siRNA and mRNA and all sorts of things about 30 or 40 years ago. And a lot of people didn't believe in them. And COVID really pushed it forward. A company like AbCellera was able to become a shining star because of COVID. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things, a couple of slides that will, you know, go over the, you know, investments globally and then across Canada and then across BC. So this is global biotech financing across since 2007, and we saw the nadir in 2008 in terms of global finance. And you can see it was pretty dim until 2014, and it started picking up. Now, this is PIPE's IPOs, venture capital financing. And then if you look at Canada, Canada followed a very similar pattern. Maybe we were more impacted in Canada than other jurisdictions. Now, when you go to BC, it was really impacted. And I remember back when I started my career about 20 years ago, we had, you know, 3 or 4 multi-billion-dollar companies: QLT, Angiotech, ID Biomedical, Aspriva. 2008, none of them were around. You know, they shut down. The VCs were gone. The companies were gone. It was pretty grim. When I moved to New York. I started a company. I came back in 2014, 15. I actually was considering whether I should stay in biotech. It wasn't, you know, Zymeworks wasn't public. AbCellera had started around 2012. And when you look at it, last year, these companies, all of them, actually, showed their outstanding and tremendous impact globally. So AbCellera came to light because they were prepared for COVID, because of the work they had done with DARPA. They had their partnerships ready with pharma. So right away they were able to work. And you look at it, that pattern of investment, BC completely broke the pattern compared to other jurisdictions. And that's something to be really proud of. And you see it across all sorts of companies. You know, a lot of these companies that I have as, you know, BC success stories are either in digital health, or they're in antibody discovery, or they're in diagnostics, or they're, of course, Aquaris and Precision Nanosystem are in RNA delivery, which, you know, the vaccines we're putting in all around the world, the most successful vaccine is the Pfizer vaccine. That's thanks to Aquaris. They get very little credit for it, I think. But if it wasn't for their delivery platform, this would not have happened. So there is one caveat with this, is that most of this funding is gone to public companies. One of the significant gaps we still have, it's a pain point for me and companies I work with, is that we still lack Series A financing, that early stage venture capital financing. We don't have a VC, significant, you know, number of VCs. We used to have a number of VCs, Pat Brady's here, you know, that were BC based. We don't anymore. I mean, we have VCs that have an office here, but it's not the same. So this is something that I wrote about in Business in Vancouver a few months ago. We do need more investments. We obviously have amazing companies that are able to attract this kind of capital better than any other province in Canada. You know, we have right now this list, number of them are private companies, but there's $5 billion plus companies on this list. That's more than any other, more than Quebec and Ontario. And I can tell you, you know, working at, you know, on the board of LifeSciences BC, we get very little funding from the province. We get way less than Ontario and Quebec. We actually get very little. We get nothing. We get very little. I mean, they support us, but they get a lot more money. So we're definitely punch above our weight. And I'm really proud of it, but we definitely need more investment because obviously the science is world class.
Thank you, Ali. So I'm now going to switch gears a little bit because Ali has set the stage of the investment in the companies that, really, I guess, for the most part, punched above their weight and hit a home run a bit due to various circumstances over the last year. But one of our great BC success stories that we're so proud of is Notch. And so want to turn it over to Greg to tell us, first of all, introduce himself and maybe talk about the journey of the pathway from discovery into a clinic and what that looked like.
Thanks, Wendy. It's very nice to meet you all. Kind of new to town. My name is Greg Block. I'm an academic scientist by training based out of Victoria. I've been here for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years in the US doing my academic training in stem cell biology and gene therapy, and had the experience to help to basically spin out a discovery stage company out of the University of Washington that then was acquired by large Japanese pharma, and then worked for Astellas Pharmaceuticals to lead their cell and gene therapy efforts in the business development realm for a couple of years prior to joining Notch. And I thought the best way to maybe structure this conversation is to talk about turtles. A female turtle will lay maybe between 300 and 1,000 eggs. Then they have to nurture them. They have to hatch. They have to make their way to the ocean. And after all of the challenges it's faced, maybe 1% succeed. And Notch Therapeutics is a company that is focused on creating a clinical therapeutic from the discovery stage. So it's very similar in terms of life cycle, what you want to do. You want to create a really nice place for those eggs to hatch and even make eggs, right? So we look to Canada and we say, where are the eggs hatching? And we have world-class academic institutions in Ontario, in British Columbia. Ontario took some pretty big steps when I was a graduate student there. They started to build out the Mars Innovation Center, CCRM, which Peter Zanstra was a part of, became an incubator for discoveries, being able to make it out of the shell and into a structure that then could build value. And the same thing is happening in Vancouver now, where we have a really fantastic economic. Sorry, I just got interrupted by a child at the worst possible time. Please close the door. We have a wonderful academic scene that is now taking the next steps to build an infrastructure to translate those discoveries into companies, build the executive talent around them, and help grow those companies with the right financing to do the right things. The story of Notch began in Toronto. It was technologies that were licensed out of the University of Toronto from Juan Carlos Unica-Flucker's lab and technologies out of Peter Zanstra's lab. Peter is now the founding director of the School of Biomedical Engineering, as Wendy mentioned earlier, which is going to help bring some of these early discoveries to fruition. We incubated for quite some time as a concept. Then we go through that early stage. We're in the discovery realm. We go through those early proof of concept stages where we have to convince investors and partners that this is a solid idea. Now that takes capital. That's usually in the form of a seed round, maybe a couple of $1 million from smart angels in our communities that are willing to take a chance on these risky and big idea concepts. And the concept of behind Notch Therapeutics was, what if we could make a therapeutic T cell that wasn't derived from a patient? What if we could take the complexities of cell therapy and just turn it into a medicine, off the shelf, something that you could just manufacture, deliver, have it work? And that's the premise that the company was founded on. With that seed capital and the founding institutions like CCRM and TIAP, we were able to bring in the right people to start thinking about this idea and networking it within the global community. And the company was able to secure an extremely value-driving partnership through a public company called Allogene that was looking for the type of solution that we were looking to develop. And we developed a global alliance with Allogene Therapeutics. They're an investor in the company. And that allowed us to sort of take it to the next level. Okay, we had a nascent team. We had some capabilities building out in the facilities in Toronto. Peter, as the CSO of the company, had come out to Vancouver. So we built out research and development capabilities in Vancouver and recruited a world-class executive team who had experience scaling companies, taking companies public, moving the discovery efforts all the way from discovery into preclinical studies into the clinic, much like someone to basically, a group of people who know how to take a turtle shell and make it a turtle. And so the company secured a $85 million Series A financing in February this year, led by US investors primarily, because as Ali mentioned, the Canadian VC scene is not at the point yet where we can write the type of checks that are required to bring therapeutics to the market. It's almost like the decimal places are in the wrong spot sometimes. So we raised this money. We've set up headquarters in Vancouver. We've opened offices in Seattle. And we are now, an intimate part of this Cascadia corridor, building up more capabilities and cross-pollination between Vancouver and Seattle. And this is going to spiral out of control, with AbCellera and Zymeworks and Notch, and all these companies building up talent, building up executive talent, the desire for people to be in Canada now, the brain gain that's happening. This is a moment for our ecosystem to shine, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. And we should say happy birthday to your, it's COVID, we're all used to interruptions, but I offered, Greg's hosting a 6-year-old birthday party right now, and I offered that we would all collectively sing happy birthday, but he said that we would terrify the birthday child. So anyway, thanks. There's lots to unpack there, and I think there's a couple of themes that have come up about, BC punching above its weight, BC being recognized in the innovation that's coming out across multiple what I would refer to as subsectors, whether it be digital health, medtech, biotech, which I think is a huge asset for us because, of course, it's nice to have skills in particular areas, but it's also nice to be somewhat diversified so that you can ride the waves of success. We've also talked about talent, and I think, in the chat, building off of a lot of the comments that Geof and Jason were talking about, there was a lot about healthcare workers, change management, how are they supported, how does AI play into what they're doing every day, and how their roles are changing. And so I'm conscious, because I know that I'm going to be told that we have to wind this up in 15 minutes. And so I thought I might go back to a couple of those themes and maybe turn to Geof first, and then Greg, I'm going to come to you and talk a little bit about AI. And you can decide whether you want to talk about how is it affecting your innovation or how is it impacting what people do every day, because we've seen that extraordinary change management, whether it be the doctors, the healthcare professionals that are in virtual care, or how decisions are made. And then Greg, there's a lot of AI, and I know Handel's on the call because he could talk extensively about this. If you could talk about how you're seeing AI impacting the area that Notch and some of our other biotech innovators are looking at. So Geof first.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity to the application of AI to what's happening around virtual care, digital health, and so on and so forth. That AI, of course, requires input, it requires data, and now that we have all these wearables and technologies in the home and remote patient monitoring and digital health applications that engage people and get them involved, we're able to collect data about what's going on. And the reason that this becomes incredibly important with the aging population and a decrease in the available caregivers and the like is that the easiest way to deal with the problem is to deal with it early, not wait until it becomes acute and a major problem that needs to be worked backwards into relative health again, But if you can see trends early and intervene early, the whole problem is going to be much easier to manage, and you can be able to do it with less labor, less intervention, and obviously a better outcome for the patient. And this is where AI is going to play a huge role, is that as we have ways of collecting data continuously from patients in their homes, we'll be able to alert caregivers and have them intervene before they have a huge problem on their hand that ends up with a patient landing in the hospital or so on and so forth. Two outcomes of that: it makes healthcare affordable, and it makes it better for the patients. I mean, who doesn't want to know that their problem can be dealt with before it becomes a big issue? So I think it's going to have a massive impact, starting with the collection of data and then using that gold mine of information to intervene early. That's where it's really going to play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Greg, do you want to weigh in on the discovery side?
Yeah, I'm trying to mentally formulate myself so I don't rant for hours on this topic. I think that the predictive power of AI is obviously going to impact the enormous data sets that we have available to us in the discovery realm. So everything from antibody discovery, the ability to synthesize and generate massive amounts of sequence data, and that to the trained eye is completely uninterpretable, and being able to use sort of machine learning and neural networks to sort of decipher and predict what's going to happen from a gene signature to an endpoint. However, there are still some very practical considerations in the discovery realm that I think are the same practical considerations that Geof is describing, which is garbage in, garbage out. So, if you're looking at the wrong cell type in a discovery effort and you haven't put all your consideration into exactly what's going on with that cell and how you're holding your variables consistent, and you're asking a machine to learn and predict what you're going to do, it's not going to be useful. And in the healthcare realm, we have a family medicine clinic that my wife runs, and we have line of sight into how unbelievably fragmented our healthcare data is in British Columbia. And to be able to deliver on the promise of AI, that needs to be consolidated in a way that's also respects the sort of integrity of our healthcare system, without basically selling it to a giant monopoly that then controls healthcare. So that's where I wanted to make sure I didn't rant too much, but obviously it's going to have major impacts into the way we do discovery, interpret data, predict patient outcomes, and I'll stop there.
I think the area of data and privacy is an area of particular passion of mine, as many on the phone know, and I think that we could unpack that as a whole separate session, so won't necessarily dive into that right now. But you're right, the fragmented data is a problem. The quality of the data, consistency of the data, and access to the data, even within the healthcare system, before you even get into it in the innovation, accessing the data for innovation. So certainly an area that we can explore much more fully. There is a question that regarding IP that I'm going to throw Ali on the spot about, and that was going back to what I mentioned earlier about IP, both being an asset and about a protection of IP, and it's certainly one that has come up in many discussions, at least events that we've had over the last little while. So, Ali, are you able to maybe weigh in on this question around the support of IP development and protection within our ecosystem, and how that plays in from an investment perspective?
Sure. I mean, traditionally, everyone needs to understand that investors invest on strong IP, and for you to develop any therapeutic product or even a medical device product, you need to have strong IP. I think a lot of digital health solutions, you may not need as much IP because it's algorithm based. You may not want to patent your algorithm because then people understand how to get around it. But I'm constantly on calls with people who have something that's interesting. It's got therapeutic application, doesn't have what they call a composition of matter patent, and that makes it difficult. Now the question is, do we build good IP in BC or in Canada? I think we do. I think we all need to understand that the best place to patent your product first and foremost is US. That's still the largest pharmaceutical market in the world. How do you attract capital for good IP? I think one of the things we've discussed in the past that I'm hoping someone is here from the government is to create incentives that incentivize companies to build their IP here and commercialize it here, and then be able to, if they commercialize it out of BC and they don't sell the company, then they might be able to take advantage of some sort of they may have some tax advantages. Because ultimately, people need to understand that when you develop good IP, you create good jobs around it. You create an ecosystem that promotes our ecosystem. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's I think you have. There's been lots of discussions around how do we create enablers to protect our IP so that we can ensure that in many cases the IP that has been developed from our research dollars we can retain some of the benefit from. It's a complex topic, and it's one that, as you reference, Ali, we can't be myopic about it and think only about BC, and for that matter even Canada, because that's one of these globally competitive areas that we need to look at. How much time do we have left, Lisa? Do we have 5 minutes left, or a bit, 5 or so? Okay, well.
Can I riff on this for a half second, Wendy? If you don't mind.
I was about to turn to you.
There you go. I preempt you. So I think Ali brings up a point, and I want to tie it back to something you were saying earlier, Wendy. And so I'd love to get the other panelists, feedback, on this. So I think, we've talked a little bit about talent, and I think and the innovation ecosystem that we've built here that is world class and double underline score, bold. That totally agree. The one area, and I think maybe it applies more to our realm in the health tech or the digital health space, but probably applies more broadly as well to the ecosystem on this idea of talent, is that we have incredible academic and research and innovation talent, and so this comes to the IP and building these innovative companies, and to Ali's point about creating this this IP engine that maybe sort of feeds Canadian companies, other companies. The area that I feel like we're lacking on in Canada is sales talent. To be candid, so I think we build these really incredibly capable, innovative companies, but we have problems selling them. Right, we have problems selling the innovation, and that may be on the life sciences side. And so what happens is our companies, get these early footholds in product market fit and start to move, but we don't have the same caliber, nor are we necessarily investing to the same degree as perhaps peer companies down in the US. And so we can't afford necessarily the talent that doesn't exist here, and we can't necessarily repatriate that talent back into the country. If I were to steal an idea from my colleague Paul Geyer, one of the ideas might be something along the lines of, we need to think about doing shred, but for sales, right? Or IRAP for shred, for sales. How do we allow companies to hire top tier talent, which is incredibly expensive? I mean, we think about, the cost of engineering and research being expensive, but the cost of sales talent is ridiculous. It's definitely the highest, general admin cost in the business. How do we think about supporting those companies as they scale commercially, and that's an area that I think we are a little bit short on at the moment.
I think it's a very good point, Jason, and one that comes up a lot, and certainly something that collaboratively as an ecosystem, regardless of whether you sit in biotech, digital health, or medtech, is a common theme that we need to really continue to work together to address. It's why I talk about talent as both develop, attract, and retain. As someone who lived overseas twice in my career, I don't necessarily get worried about people leaving, because I think you gain extraordinary experience working in other jurisdictions and places. It's just, how do we get them to come back? Like Greg did, as it sounds like. But that international and global experience, I actually think, is one of the things that makes BC strong. You meet people, very often they've had experience in other jurisdictions. It means they're used to collaborating. with diverse cultures, with diverse countries in different environments. And I think that is what helps us become global leaders. But how do we make sure that we, continue to have that cycle of that talent attraction, retention, and development? With that, this has gone by very quickly. I'm going to ask each of my panelists to say a short closing remark. And I'd like you to focus on, as you think about BC, what are those things that you think are really our competitive advantage in our life sciences sector? We all like to say we're world class, and it makes us feel good. But if you were challenged by somebody, what is it about the BC life sciences sector that really is world class? And Geof, you get to go first because you're in the top left corner of my screen.
Okay. Well, because it's BC, I guess is my quick and dirty answer. Particularly when it comes to digital health and software, you can pretty much do it anywhere on the planet now. Our company, we haven't been in the same room for over a year, and it doesn't seem to have slowed us down at all. So why not here? To be honest, costs are lower. We have the investment tax credit is fantastic. The SHRED program is fantastic. So why not locate here? If you're doing something that can be done anywhere on the planet, where else would you choose? Somebody's going to talk to me about housing costs, but I've got an answer for that, but I'll leave it for when they ask the question.
Okay, and Ali, you're next as I go across my row.
Sure. I think it has to do with our culture. I think we have a very cooperative, cohesive culture here that, at least I've always felt everyone's here to help each other. I find it that people band together and help each other. It's a very tight community. And this is not the case in other jurisdictions from what I hear. We have, one provincial health sale authority. We have one biotechnology association, and we have a number of amazing serial entrepreneurs that have gone back and recreated companies here. So it's a can-do attitude. And I think the fact that maybe it's a blessing in disguise that we don't get a lot of provincial government support. Best ideas have to survive on their own feet, and we end up creating great ideas that have to sustain themselves. So and in addition, the EBC tax credit, it's a godsend. But as I said, what we really need is that venture capital that bridges that seed financing to a larger global venture financing.
Excellent. That's and part of why I'm asking you to do this is, you may recall, that was one of my slides. So I'm just trying to find out if everybody agrees with what I say is world class about BC. So Greg, you get to be next.
Thanks. I'd probably reiterate a lot of the same points that Ali made, but maybe I'll switch it to be a little bit more forward looking. When I look at where Seattle was 10 years ago versus where it is now, and I look at where Toronto was 10 years ago versus where it is now, Vancouver is in year 2. So we have a lot of fodder for learning, best practices on how to build a really outstanding ecosystem. We have the cohesive culture and global talent to help make this place what we want it to be. So for me, being a new member to the life sciences community in BC, the thing I'm most excited about is just the opportunity to build something outstanding.
Thank you. So what we've heard so far is an attractive investment climate. Of course, we want more, but with SHRED and some of the other programs, relatively low cost. You can talk to Geof later about housing prices, but and a culture of which is cohesive, cooperative, and really tries to support each other. A fodder for learning. I think it is an environment that is a can-do environment. So Jason, you get to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think everyone else did a tremendous job. I think really summarizing your strengths, and I think I would just further expound on Greg's last point. I wonder now, and I think what makes me optimistic and thrilled and excited about BC and probably its future potential and success is going to be rooted on this idea that I think we may have hit a bit of a critical mass associated with this cluster in our ecosystem, and I think that's really having sort of been here for 15 years now, it really feels like, certainly on the traditional life sciences side, on the therapeutic side, but more so, especially now in the med device and digital health side, it really feels like we've got just this wonderful ecosystem and cluster. And granted, again, there's other areas that, we may be able to get better at, but it just really feels like now we have this flywheel, critical mass that's really going to benefit us going forward. And I think as Greg said, we're year 2, but I bet you we hit year 10 growth in less time than that.
That's great. Thank you. All right, we'll now hand it over to our fearless leader. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists. Great discussion, and it's always fun to get together.